guys, welcome back to Strong Successful Male. So for today, I'm going to read an article titled More Americans Living Alone as Milestones Slip Later in Life. And guys, this article is brand new, came out today, and it's from The Hill. It's going to be talking all about how, guess what, more Americans are choosing to live alone than be obviously in marriages, relationships, and all that. And in fact, it says here 28% of households in the U.S. are men or women living alone, up from 13% from 60 years earlier. That's huge. And what this tells me is that obviously more and more people are waking up to realize that, guess what, things like marriage and all that isn't exactly what's cracked up to be, and this is what we have today. No surprise there. And also, they're putting off what's considered to be major life milestones like getting married, having kids, and all that. And as I've talked to you guys about in previous articles, previous videos I've done about the subject, governments are starting to soil themselves over this because it is going to impact things down the road, like the ability to pay, for instance, the United States, Social Security and all that, because people aren't having kids, so they need, or as much, the birth rates are down, they've been declining for years, so that's less people that are going to become workers, paying Social Security taxes into the system to cover those different costs that they have. And they're basically shitting their pants over this. And also means less consumers and so on and so forth. And so when I read these things, I just got to laugh because it's no surprise to me. Because after a while, people are going to realize that just things like marriage, it's not what it's cracked up to be. And more guys in particular are not getting into this, realizing that they've seen their fathers, their uncles, their grandfathers, brothers, whatever, being raked over the coals in these no-fault divorce states and just getting hammered. They're like, it's not for me. The younger kids, they're putting this stuff off. Now, sure, some are putting it off because they may not make enough money or the maturity level is not exactly what it once was decades ago from kids graduating college and all that. But still, many are realizing it's not worth it. And maybe they're watching channels like mine. Who knows? But anyhow, guys, I want to go over this. It's interesting because it's good. I like to cover these things. It has up-to-date statistics on what's going on in the world. And also, guys, when I've done this article, I'm going to go over another article from CNBC. It's about 6 weeks old, and it talks more about the drop in the birth rates and how it's going to have an economic impact from things like that. And again, the government is soiling themselves. So it starts off, it says here, more than a quarter of American households are made up of people living alone as the ranks of senior citizens swell and younger Americans continue to delay life milestones that previous generations reached earlier in life. There were 37 million one-person households in the United States in 2021. The U.S. Census Bureau reported last week, representing 28% of all households across the country and 15% of the overall population. In 1960, just 13% of households were occupied by just one person. In the past decade, the number of Americans living alone jumped by 4 million. So yeah, 13% in 1960, up to 28% 2021. That's pretty huge in 60 years, in my opinion. It says just half of American adults, 50%, are living with a spouse, down from 52% a decade ago. At the same time, the share of Americans living with an unmarried partner is rising. Today, 8% of Americans over the age of 18 live with a partner to whom they are not wedded, almost double the 4.1% rate the census measured in 2001. So it's doubled in 20 years. Again, this doesn't surprise me. Less and less people are getting married, or they're waiting way longer to do it. Those two figures continue a long-term trend in which Americans delay marriage till later in life. Gee, I wonder why. Who could ever imagine why? When the Census Bureau first analyzed marriage data in 1947, the median man got married at 23 years old and 7 months, and the median woman wedded for the first time at 20 years and 5 months. Holy crap, average dude 23 years and change, average gal 20 years and change. But you know what? It was a different ballgame back then, and let me tell you, the maturity level back in those days was night and day. I mean, nowadays, it seems to me, in my experience, what I've observed is that the maturity level of the average guy or gal graduating college nowadays was pretty much the equivalent to the maturity level that my generation had when we were graduating high school. And you can thank the helicopter moms and dads and the spoiling of the kids, every kid gets a trophy generation for this. No surprise there. But back when my mom graduated high school back, I believe in 1963 or 1964, she said it was very common that people would get married right out of high school within a year or so. Very common. So that doesn't surprise me hearing the statistic. It goes on. Today, the median age for a man when he first gets married is 30 years old in 4 months, while the median age for a woman is 28 years and 6 months. What a huge difference in that time period, huh? But you know what? Good. I tell guys all the time, if you're going to do it, wait until like you're 30 years old. Get some life experience, work, save some money, build up your credit score, build up your net worth, all these things. Get some experience in many areas of your life. And then if you're going to do it, okay, at least you've reached a much higher level of maturity. Instead of doing this boneheaded crap like getting married in your early 20s or right out of school. You're crazy. You're a kid. You have no experience. It says here, today, 34% of Americans, 30% of all Americans over the age of 15 have never been married, up from 23% in 1950. Over the age of 15, I think that's a typo because I certainly hope they don't mean 15 years old. The data are symptoms of a population that is making critical life decisions at later ages than earlier generations at the same age. The evidence is most evident in birth rates, which have been dropping steadily for decades, and more in recent years, a phenomenon demographers call the baby bust. Yeah, less people are having kids. Now, I know there are people, I've known people that they have a child, but they haven't had two because, quite frankly, to them it was just too expensive. Okay? And as pretty much you have people that the cost of living, basically what they make versus the cost of living compared to, say, their parents' generation of what they made as an income and the cost of living at the time, it's obviously higher nowadays, and we don't need to get into economic discussion. That's not what this is about right now, but it is what it is, so they've avoided having additional children. Then again, other people, but then again also, because they go in the statistics of like 1.7 per parent or something like that, whatever it is you're going to see in a moment. Still, there's probably people that aren't having kids because they're not getting married or they realize I don't want to have kids. And again, this scares the crap out of governments. I've done articles, different governments around the world pretty much begging their population to breed. Both more young adults living alone and an increasing age of first marriage are likely to diminish the number of births. Of course, not all births occur in marriage, but the increase in young adults living alone and delayed marriage reflect changing societal attitudes about families and children. Said Kenneth Johnson, senior demographer at the University of New Hampshire's Carsey School. The number of American women who gave birth in 2020, a year in which many decisions to have or grow a family may have been influenced in part by the pandemic, fell at the steepest rate over the previous year since 1973, and according to the National Center for Health Statistics at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. That drop came even though there are more women of childbearing age in the population than there were a decade ago. Well, it seems like I knew people left and right that were having kids in 2020 or getting pregnant in 2020. So I guess that's just a Massachusetts thing. Who knows? Maybe the rest of the world or America, no. But in Massachusetts, it was cold and they were breeding like rabbits that year. I don't know. But even before the pandemic, birth rates were falling off a cliff. Birth rates were lower in every month of 2020, including January and February before the pandemic enforced lockdowns. And in subsequent months, when pregnancies began long before the coronavirus dominated news headlines compared to 2019. The trend has continued this year. Births are down another 5% over the first 3 months of 2021 from the already record low of 2020. And let's remember, guys, that as you have more gals with the idea, thanks to the movement, that, hey, I can wait till later in life and it'll be no problem finding a guy and I can have kids and I'm going to spend my 20s either riding the carousel, let's be honest here, or being a career woman, being that chick from Sex and the City. And then the 30s come along, and guess what? It's not so easy. It's not so easy to find guys, particularly guys now that have learned a few things at the expense of other guys that have gone through bad times and been definitely harmed by the era we're in. And then they're up shit's creek and not breeding. But ultimately, guys will be blamed for that too. Anyhow, it says just over 3.6 million births took place in 2020, about 700,000 fewer births than occurred in 2007, the year American births reached a peak. Isn't that interesting? In 13 years, 700,000 fewer births. The intervening years between the Great Recession, which set the millennial generation well behind their predecessors in things like savings, debt, and accumulated wealth, all of which tend to be precursors to decisions about whether to buy a home, get married, or begin a family. Johnson, an expert on the plunging birth rate, estimates that the fertility declines that began in the midst of the Great Recession have added up to 7.6 million fewer births than might have been expected in the same number of years at a previous point in American history. Another indication of the delayed life decisions is the increasing number of younger people living with their parents. The 2021 figures show 11.2% of adults over the age of 18 still live with their parents, up from 10% in 2001 and 10.6% in 2011. Yeah, well, again, who are these kids? They are the kids of the parents. And many of them were the helicopter parents, and gave everything they wanted, spoiled them, and now they're back home. You know, my mom has a saying that pretty much that, you raised your kids right when they don't need you. Well, you got this generation that's been going back a while now, a couple decades of this era. You got the big chunk of the millennial group, the latter millennials, and definitely the Generation Z, the Z-tards. And they weren't raised to take care of themselves. They were given so much. Now, I'm not saying everybody, but this generation, let's be honest here, very pampered, very coddled, very spoiled. The parents raised them to be their buddy, not be prepared for adulthood. And as any wonder, they can't take care of themselves, and they're back to living with mom and dad rent-free. I think a big chunk of this group are the ones that are part of this, the so-called Great Resignation. And they go back home and live with mom and dad because, hey, I don't have to work. I'm not going to let the corporations win, so I'm going to stay at home. And the mom and dad let them. Or at least one parent does. Now, I'm going to go through another article, guys, dealing with more about the decline in childbirths and the impact it's going to have on different social programs and all that. And again, the government, this is about the United States, is certainly worried about this, as are many governments around the world, and you guys have seen the different articles I've covered. This article's title is Drop in U.S. Birth Rates Amid COVID-19 Could Have Lasting Economic Impact. And this article is from about 6 weeks ago. It says women gave birth to fewer children during COVID-19 pandemic. In these low U.S. birth rates, if these low U.S. birth rates continue, it could have a lasting economic impact, including retirement and Social Security benefits. The total fertility rate has been declining for years. In 1964, women of childbearing age had an average of 3.2 children. By 1974, that number fell to 1.8. That's a big jump. 1964 to 1974, that's a very big jump, according to the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. Flash forward to 2019, and the provisional total fertility rate was just 1.7, according to a March 2020 report for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Then COVID led to an even fewer births than expected in 2020. Recent research from Cornell University found that the U.S. birth rate declined by 7.1% during the pandemic. Again, this is clearly everywhere else because in Massachusetts, people I knew left and right were breeding. And it wasn't that cold of a winter, but I guess, okay, got nothing else to do, so we're going to hook up the whole time. And alas, all these kids being created or being given birth to in 2020 or the end of 2020. Pregnancies that were delayed from 2020 to 2022 may be deferred to 2024 to 2026, according to the Center for Retirement Research. Yet there are reasons to believe that the birth rate could stay low. It's staying low because, again, more and more people are not getting married or then putting off longer in life, realizing, in my opinion, it's not worth it. Or maybe they just simply figure, you know what, I'm going to wait a while. I'm going to grow up a little bit before I take on this giant expense. And they realize maybe when they get older, maybe I don't want to do this. I see all my friends with little kids and babies, and they're tired all the time. They're broke. They're not having any fun. Maybe this isn't for me. I'll let somebody else do that. It says the age of motherhood has been increasing in both the U.S. and other developed countries for the past couple of decades, according to Anki Chen, Assistant Director, Savings Research at the Center for Retirement Research. Today, for women in the U.S., that age is around 30 years old. At the same time, the total fertility rate of 1.7 children per woman as of 2019 was well below the replacement rate of 2.1 children. So the average age now apparently is 30 years old for a woman. I believe once a gal gets to about 35, it's considered to be a high-risk pregnancy. That's not far away. So what's going on now? I'll tell you what's going on. putting it off later on because the idea is, hey, you can get as much guys as you want later in life. Won't be a problem. Well, many have learned it is not as easy as one has thought. Riding the carousel for all those years, because that's obviously promoted. You're not considered strong and independent and empowered unless you are a professional carousel rider in your 20s. Doing the work thing, becoming a corporate girl, because you can't do both and then also get very serious. 30s come along, it's not so easy. And of course, those that wait longer, it is more risk that the pregnancies don't work. So it's not a surprise here. What does this come back to? The movement, as you know what I'm talking about here. It says here, factors affecting birth rates. While women may expect to have 2 children, there are reasons they may not happen. For women in their 30s who delay having children during COVID, fertility issues could prevent them from having the number of children they expect. The more you delay, the less likely you are to meet your expectations, Chen said. Additionally, women who were in their early 20s during the global recession caused by COVID may also end up having fewer children in their lifetimes, according to Chen. This is due to the fact that starting their careers in these conditions could have long-lasting effects on their career development and earning potential. The birth rate is watched closely by experts due to its effect on retirement, named Social Security. Now we're getting to the meat and potatoes of the article, why they wrote it, because the governments are worried. That program is a pay-as-you-go system, Chen said. Today's workers are paying for today's retirees' benefits. Then future workers will pay for the benefits when current workers retire. It's a problem because people generally, somebody's going to debate me on this, but generally people have been living longer as the decades have gone on. And so when this program was started up many, many moons ago, the average life, the life expectancy was much lower. So someone would retire, they got paid Social Security. At a certain point, they died, but now they're living way longer. So you have now apparently fewer births that will lead to less future workers paying into the Social Security system, for these benefits. So that's less money. People are living longer, so that's more money being paid out. So policymakers are in a bit of dealing with a problem here. The older ones are figuring, hey, I'm going to retire, I won't have to deal with it, but somebody's going to have to deal with it. Raise taxes, that's never popular. Cut benefits, that's never popular. My generation, I'm going to be 44 pretty soon. A lot of us think that either A, ain't going to be available by the time we would qualify, which they'll probably bump it to 70 years old by the time I'm 70. So you better prepare for yourself. Or the purchasing power of those checks that will come, once or twice a month will be so little, it'll be enough to fill up your car. They'll just have it dwindle down. Anyhow, consequently, the Social Security Administration watches birth rates closely. In its recent annual Trustees Report, the government agency increased the total fertility rate assumption from 1.95 children to 2, a 0.9 increase from 2020 report. That projection, along with an estimated slower overall pace of mortality improvement, were positive factors in the latest estimates. Still, the program overall faces a potential shortfall that should prompt lawmakers to act in order to avoid major cuts to benefits that would start in 2034, the Center for Retirement Research said. If nothing is done by that time, just 78% of benefits will be payable. Okay, so they got 12 years. The can will be kicked down the road until somebody has to deal with it at that time. Like I said, raise taxes, that's never popular. Cut benefits, that's certainly never popular. This is what happens you're going to deal with when you have varying social programs. When people get used to it and they pay into it, and I paid into this, so I should get something out of it. See what I mean? How fewer births affect retirement. For women who have fewer children, there could be a potential upside in retirement. Many women face a so-called motherhood penalty due to the fact that their earnings are reduced with each child they have, which permanently reduces their lifetime incomes. This can carry over into retirement, particularly due to lower income through Social Security benefits. Women having fewer children could minimize the effects of the motherhood penalty, given that their earnings will not suffer as much. However, because Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, fewer births would also mean fewer future workers available to contribute to the system. Consequently, that could result in an everyone penalty with lower benefits for everyone, Chen said. If there are fewer workers in the future, then that could impact the amount of money going into the Social Security system, which would affect benefits too, Chen said. Yeah, that's what's going to happen. And we shall see. But point of the article, guys, I did 2 of these here. One was the main article. This is one just backing up about the birth rates. Yeah, less people are getting married. More people are choosing to live alone, which I know many of you guys are either you have been living alone for a while, or maybe you're in a bad marriage and you're ending it and you want to live alone because you've done this thing, it doesn't work out. But the point is, more and more people are living alone. They're either not doing these major, what they call life milestones, like getting married and having kids, or they're putting off for a longer time when they figure things out and so forth. It's having an effect. And believe me, lawmakers, policymakers, whatever you want to call them, they're definitely worried about this. And again, this is just here in the US of A. It is everywhere, because I've done articles in Denmark, in Sweden, Japan. I've read these different articles, some of which I haven't covered here, where these things these governments are doing to encourage people to breed, it's hilarious, you know. But anyhow, it should be interesting to see how this plays out. But every single year, the birth rate just keeps declining and declining. And in 2022, maybe halfway to 2022, I'll do an article and pretty much say the same exact thing. And lawmakers are shitting their pants, and, you know, here we go again. So, all right, guys, that is it for today. Be sure to comment down below. Let me know what you think about this. For any of you guys that are watching me from overseas, let me know how things are in your country. You have to tell me where you're from if you want to keep it private, but just let me know in your country how things are going with the whole birth rate issue. I'd like to know about that. Is that something that comes up in your news with your governments and all that? Just let me know. And guys, be sure to like the video, share with your friends, and subscribe. And I'll catch you next time.